Evening, whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On FlintTalkRadio.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program, and we are delighted, as always, to have you with us this afternoon. As you know, we come on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're here from 2 to 3 every Monday, without exception, unless I'm out of the country. And we know you're there tuned in as well on a regular basis to Flint Studios #1 podcast program in the Genesee County area. And we are working very hard, as always, to become the #1 studio in the entire country. And we have some work to do, we admit that. But we're working to get the work done, and we're doing some work here at the studio to build our capacity. You'd be surprised what's going on here at the studio as we begin to enlarge upon our operations and try to bring you more content to the listening audience and to the public that is attuned to what we're doing here. So we're glad to have you this afternoon. Hope you'll stay with us for the next hour. And we're going to talk about some of the things you want to talk about. I know you want to talk about the Super Bowl game, because the Super Bowl game yesterday, you know, we've had some good Super Bowls in the past, but I think that the advertisers should be asking some of their money back because after the first half, I didn't think they were coming back. Anybody out there think that Denver was coming back after they were trailing by 22 points and hadn't scored in the first half? The score after one half was 22-0, and if anyone thought there was going to be a miracle worker coming into the second half, that Peyton was going to be able to pull it out, given the kind of year that he'd had, that first play in the second half where the guy took the kickoff and ran right down the field and scored another touchdown. I mean, I pulled my hair out. I have to tell you, I lost a breakfast in the ordeal, so I was a little upset about it. That was 29-0 after they did the extra point kick, and from there it was all downhill, as if it could go any further downhill. This was not a Super Bowl game. You think about the Super Bowl games being the ones that really are is a game that's the climax of the season, and this was not a climactic game. And I'm reading. I have to say that there were a lot of things that went on outside the game too. I was looking at Chris Matthews, who did an interview with Archie Manning, the father of Eli Manning and Peyton Manning, and I was impressed with the interview that he did. I can see where the class of that family comes from. Archie Manning had tremendous class in terms of what he was saying he had done to raise his children, and he and his wife have obviously done a very good job because they show class in the football field and they show class off the football field. But you know what? We can't get sidetracked in terms of how much class they showed after the game was over and start talking about how a guy named Lopez asking for his autograph on the way from the stadium into the locker room, and Peyton told him to wait until he came out and he would sign his autograph. Everybody was talking about how wonderful that was and how much class he had. Yeah, that's true. I give him a lot of credit, but can we stay focused on the football game? I mean, everybody likes Peyton because Peyton does have a lot of character, and we have yet to find a single thing that he has been involved in that's been scandalous, because the family that he comes out of, I think, grounded him in a very strong foundation of what is right and what is wrong, and they both are the kind of models you want your children looking up to. But that was a bad game yesterday, and those that are taking their eyes off the game talk about the character that Peyton has and how this will not hurt his legacy. I think we got to examine that through another lens, and we're not going to be on this the whole hour, the whole 2 segments of the program. But we need to spend some time with it and give our particular view here in this program of how we see it. And if we're going to say that a person's winning record and the amount of touchdown passes they throw in a season, which he threw 55 touchdown passes this year, and had thrown for more than 6,000 yards, if that is to add to his legacy, then when something happens that deficits, then that's subtraction of the legacy. You can't have it both ways and say that only only addition is done. And so yesterday there was some subtraction. And I wrote 2 articles about it, one of which was an article about the fact that I had betted a breakfast on the game. And that didn't turn out well. Obviously, my team lost, and so I have to pay this guy breakfast on Saturday for the 10th time in a row. I've got to start watching the games in the regular season because I don't watch it until the playoffs, and I don't know what the teams have been doing all during the regular season. If I had known about Seattle and knew about that defense, there's no way in the world I would have been betting for Denver, knowing how great that defense was and how great it had been all during the football season. But I didn't know, so I'm thinking that 6,000 yards, and you do that on any team. Well, I lost a breakfast in the ordeal, but I'll be watching more games next year. But let's talk about the football game and not get sidetracked on how Peyton is a nice guy and would sign autographs even in the face of defeat. I mean, this belongs on Wide World of Sports. The agony of defeat. He was still able to be the Peyton Manning that we've come to love and admire and appreciate as a person that we can put in front of our children without worrying about our children getting the wrong message from the kind of image he projects. But let's stay on football here and talk about the kind of game that he had. And if this doesn't tarnish his image as a football player, one of the greatest of all times, then having won the game then should not have added to it. In other words, this is the law of opposites here. If you have something to add to a person's legacy, then there's something that can take away from it as well. And what has happened, although he's won 5 Most Valuable Player awards, the fact is that Peyton Manning has had his throat choked by his own hands on 2 different occasions in the Super Bowl. He choked once before in the final seconds of a game where he threw an interception and didn't read the defense appropriately, and I think panicked because the time was running out, but had enough time to go down the field and score, and he didn't do it. And in this game here, he never showed up. And so I admire the quality of character that he brings to the game. But I have to say the truth here, that in the room where you go to the Hall of Fame players, and then you put in that little room where the real Hall of Fame players are, Peyton Manning would not be in there in the same place as the greatest quarterback of all times, which I think, and I'm going to declare it here on the station, see if anybody will back me up on ESPN. We're going to declare who is the greatest player of all times as far as the quarterback position, and I'll even say who is the greatest running back of all times. I don't think there's any controversy in what I'll be saying about that. But the greatest quarterback of all times is Johnny Unitas. And those of you who are modernists that want to talk about the players that are playing in this time period as opposed to those time periods, because the game has changed, let's understand how the game has changed. And one of the ways in which it's changed is that you throw these short passes now and the guy runs for another 40 yards. And if you go back and look at the time period in which Johnny Unitas was playing, throwing to Johnny Orr, you see, I know these. I know more about football in the past than I know about it right now. I mean, I know the game that made football what it is, and that was a game they played where Baltimore played. Unitas being the quarterback for Baltimore Colts, and they played the New York Giants, which was quarterbacked by Y.A. Tittle. And that game was played in 1958, in which it went into what they call Southern Death, but now they call it overtime because who's dying out there? Hopefully nobody dies out there. And those who have been hurt in the game will get their payment from the league to set up a fund now for those who are now suffering from injuries sustained in football. And that's the right thing to do. But we're talking about a different kind of way of we playing the game right now, because the players are faster. They run after they catch the ball a lot more, and some of them turn these 5-yard passes into 40-yard touchdowns. And so some of those touchdowns they're talking about right now are made by the players who run the football and not by the quarterback, although he gets credit for it because he did throw the ball, and that did end up in terms of being a touchdown. But we need another statistic now, given that these guys are running with that ball after they have caught it and then running another 50 yards or 50, 60 yards down the field. You very seldom see them throwing from 30 yards out or 40 yards out and then throwing the ball into the end zone, which is what I saw Johnny Unitas doing on a regular basis. And his yards are pretty much true yards because he was throwing the ball downfield, and that's where the receivers caught the ball, and it wasn't that far to go once they caught the ball because he was throwing the ball in the end zone or close their end. And there was Johnny Orr that was one of the receivers. He was a short distance threat, and they had Lenny Moore that was more of a long distance threat. And they had this other player that would catch the ball on the sideline by planting his feet right there on the edge of the sideline and catching the ball as Johnny Unitas threw it to the outside. And he wasn't going anywhere because once he caught the ball, he fell out of bounds. So the yards would be different. But it does not mean that because the yards are greater now than it was in that time period that the quarterback was greater. I think that's what the commentators are, in fact, missing. Johnny Unitas is the greatest quarterback of all times, and he was one of those quarterbacks that the Baltimore Colts, I'm talking about his prime here, was never out of a game because as long as Johnny Unitas had that ball in the last minute of the game, or the closing seconds of the game, as long as that ball was in his hands, then the game was not over. And there were many games. I used to become very thrilled in watching the games because something would happen dramatic at the very end of the game that he brought them back again, and the commentators, in a moment of tremendous broadcasting, would have a moment of silence. This was great broadcasting with commentators that knew when to stop talking and just let you embrace the moment in silence, as the only noise being made was that made by the crowd that was in fact cheering. That was some great broadcasting. It takes a lot of talent to be quiet and not say anything. Let the moment speak for itself. Let you put your own face on what you just saw. And that was some great broadcasting when they would do that. They don't do too much now. They got to always, inject themselves. We got tonsillitis now. We got to be talking, and our tongues got to be out there. We got to say what we think happened and tell the viewers what they saw, as if they can't, view it for themselves and put their own face on it, as they did in the past. We're not supposed to be able to think today, but back in the day when they had those kind of games, where they had some remarkable passes thrown to these receivers that ran downfield, and a lot of one-on-one coverage, which allowed the receiver to get open. He knew where he was going. The defenders didn't know, but he knew where he was going. And they would be open, and Johnny Unitas would do a pinpoint pass and throw it down the field for 40 or 50 yards, and it would be something just to watch. He was never out of a game. And when I compare Johnny Unitas to what I'm saying right now, even though Peyton's statistics are better, and he'll go down in history as a great player and a great sportsman, and I would applaud him on both those fronts. But I've seen both players play, and I will tell you that in my limited, judgment, I didn't play football. I played baseball in college, but I was a sports fan. I was watching Roger Maris in baseball, so I was watching baseball too. I played baseball, so I was more into baseball than I was football. But I watched football as well because I was into all the sports at that time in my life. I only watch it now during the playoffs and the Super Bowl. But when I go back and look at the quarterbacks now and how they're throwing the ball and how these receivers now are faster than they were during that time period, and they have these zone defenses and things like that, and they're running right through them and still going to touchdown. That's a different kind of ball that was played, and some of those yards that they're giving the quarterback credit for, he didn't throw the ball 6,000 yards. He threw the ball, I bet you, if you look at where the ball was caught, and then you subtract the yards that would be in addition to that, and take that out of the record book, you find that was not anywhere close to the number of yards that was allotted to the quarterback. Not taking anything away from Peyton Manning, who is really a great quarterback. But let's talk about the way the game has changed from the time when United played that game against which made football the game that was played in '58. Where Baltimore played against New York, that game made football, because once that game became so exciting at the end, where it went into what Kurt Gowdy called it Southern Death. And I even remember how they jumped all over him for having said Southern Death, thinking he was being too dramatic. But it meant that what he meant by it was what we all knew, was that the first team that scored, that was it. In overtime, now they give the teams, both a chance to score, and if both teams score, for example, by maybe a field goal, because they couldn't move the ball into the end zone, then the next time they have to go. Then the next time, if both teams didn't score a touchdown after they've had a field goal, then the third try to break the tie, they have to go for two if they score a touchdown. So they have a different way of doing it. But back in that time period, whichever team won the toss, the other team had to stop the team, and if the team that received the ball scored, you lost. I like that better, and I would call it Southern Death, because the team died. You don't exist anymore. You lost. And another thing comes up. We're talking about Super Bowl here, but there's some sides of the Super Bowl that nobody's talking about. There was one person that posted on Facebook, and he said that the 77 cents out of a dollar the president talked about in terms of how much the women make compared to men, and supposedly women are getting 23 cents less than men for doing the same work. And I raised a question after watching the Super Bowl game that there is a wage gap between men and other men. And on that football field, both teams are doing the same work, but one team got twice as much. So do we need to pass a law now and say that we need to stop this discrimination out there in football? Because one team, the winning team, Seattle, their players got $92,000 per player yesterday because they won the game. And then Denver Broncos, their team's members got $46,000, one half of what the winning team got. They said they both did the same work out there, and it would be seen as discriminatory unless you add in the other information. Because once you add the other information in, then maybe something else explains it. But we want to jump to the chase that the differential can be explained through sexism, and then if it's blacks and whites, then it's racism, and just all kinds of things that we want to conclude without all of the evidence. And so they're out there doing the same job. They didn't get the same pay. One team got more. And one team got more. And it could have been, the reason why it's not discriminatory is because the other team could have gotten more if it didn't, in fact, stop the other team from scoring and scored themselves and did what the other team did. And then that would have been, then they would have been the ones that would have been advantaged. And so wage gaps don't necessarily mean that there's discrimination that explains the wage gaps. Other things can factor into it. I wish this president could understand that in terms of men and women, what explains it.
Actually, though, from what I understand, if you look at his administration, I guess there's somebody just I can't quote it, but I guess there's supposed to be a great inequity there between the female members of his cabinet and the male members of his cabinet as far as regards to pay. So he does. I mean, they use everything just as a beating point for everybody else, but they don't want it turned on them. You know?
And I knew where you were going to go with that because I have read the same report that there's a differential in the president's administration and in the other parts of the federal government, because you can have different numbers, and you don't have to go to discriminatory conduct to explain why the numbers are different. A lot of variables are factored into why there are these differences. And when you begin to put the other things into it, you see that, for example, once they begin to put all the things into the discrepancy between men's pay and women's pay, once they did that, they only found about a 5 cent difference between women's pay and men's pay, and once it gets down to 5%, that's like you're saying that we're going to predict the winner of the election, or we're going to say that the polls are off by 3 to 4%. Once it gets between 3 to 4 to 5% in terms of the differential, then it becomes so insignificant that if you're trying to use discrimination to explain it, the numbers are such infinitesimally small numbers that you really can't put the variable upon discrimination as explaining it, because if it was discrimination, it would be much more expanded in terms of what the discrepancies would be, and 5% would not explain discrimination. In fact, 5% dismisses discrimination as an explanation.
Mark Perry, professor at U of M, he's an economics professor up there. He addressed this pay inequity issue. It had to be several years ago, but I left there years ago, and he pretty much dismantled that argument. And basically, another thing is too, a thing that I'd like to point out is like they were bringing this up back during the time when unions had a huge, membership. A lot of, most unions had huge memberships, and there was still a problem with women not getting as much pay as men in those kind of shops, those kind of clothes. And it was like, yeah, they were dues paying members of the same union yet, but the union was not, making it an issue about getting them equal pay. So, I mean, it's like the organization that's set up to actually help the workers was negligent in that respect. So, I mean, that was some time ago. Now, the union membership is going to diminish greatly, but I don't see how they could get away with it. Now, if there is a glaring case and they could prove a woman's doing the same job, but a woman's gone for 3 to 5 years to raise a family and then wants to come back to the workforce, her skill set, especially if it's technical, is degenerated. I mean, it's the point. At that point, that's never emphasized. They just make it sound like it's arbitrarily created. Well, she at that point is not the same on the workforce as the men who stayed on the job, who didn't take 3 to 5 years off. If they had done the same thing would have happened. I mean, they would lose that edge. But technology, computer, I could come back the next day. If I was gone for 3 years doing what I do here on the Flint Talk Radio, I'd have a long time catching up. The learning curve would be quite steep.
It would be quite steep, and you would also have lost some of the seniority status that men were not off the job would have continued to gain, because they did not leave for different reasons that women leave for, such as they want to nurture the children, and they're the ones who are the ones that have to bring the children into the world, and that has an effect upon the numbers. But they act like there's no variables, and there are no variables involved, and the single thing that explains it is that the women are being discriminated against. I'll tell you another thing that would take away from that particular explanation, and that is we don't see any suits coming through the courts, because it's not like the women that were prior to 1920, when they passed the 19th Amendment, where women were given the right to vote. Women are much more assertive right now. I mean, all women now are Susan B. Anthony and Lydia Childs. It's like any discrimination that goes on, you can expect to have some commemoration about the discrimination. Nobody's going to be quiet about it anymore, and I'm glad women will assert themselves. But because we don't see a plethora of suits coming through the court, the assumption has to be then, in the absence of any court cases claiming that there's this massive this massive mistreatment of women in the workplace, and because it's so massive, we have these suits. In the absence of seeing that and seeing the legal cases coming being brought before the court claiming discriminatory conduct, it would subsume the idea that discrimination is more imagined than real. And the other thing would be, I would expect to find, if women are getting 23 cents less than men in the workforce, I would expect to find more women employed than men. Because anybody that thinks an employer sees anything other than dollar signs is not reading the system that we live under. And of course, I don't know how long we'll have it, because it's changed every day. But people begin to attack it because they don't understand what it is that they have. But if you can pay women 23 cents less than you're paying men, I can tell you right now, I would expect to see men's unemployment skyrocket, because the capitalist is going to, and has shown, both sexually and racially speaking, that he's going to go for that which saves him money and allows him to grow his business, which can only grow through the profit motive. And it would make no sense for a businessman to practice discrimination. and nobody can show me any evidence of it. You know, you go look at wherever discrimination has been practiced anywhere in the world, and find out where it came from. And I guarantee you that discrimination never came from any business persons. Why would a business person want to pay more when he can pay less? Can anybody ask that question? And really, I'll tell you a picture that nobody talks about. This is Black History Month too, and we'll be talking about some of that this month. But I'll tell you what I saw on the day after they went back on those buses in Montgomery. I saw King and Abernathy sitting in the front row of the bus. They weren't sitting in the 10th row, 11th row, where Rosa Parks was sitting in the front of the bus. And the whites were sitting behind them, and they were just as calm as a cucumber back there. Nobody was protesting or any of that. Once the politicians were made to stop putting those signs up there, the bus company put those signs up there, the city of Montgomery, the ordinance, the state of Alabama, those were the ones saying those signs that they have that separation. Once the signs were taken down, the bus company didn't care whether they were up or not. What they wanted you to do is put that 25 cents in that box. That's where they were coming from. And when they stopped the hotels from not renting the rooms to black customers, the hotels were making more money. What part of that would they not understand or appreciate? Making more money is better than making less money. And having more customers is better than having fewer customers. And that's how business people ordinate themselves around their business. They don't care who's on those sheets. They got to be watched, whoever uses them. And so they just want to make sure they don't lose any customer base.
Well, the hotel that where Dr. King was staying at when he was murdered, was that a black hotel? I mean, was that an everyday run-of-the-mill?
At first, he stayed at the White Hotel.
Yeah.
And he went to the Lorraine Hotel because they criticized him and said, here's the guy is leading these poor folks on a poor people's campaign. He's over here living in the Ritz. He's over here living in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel over here with the Hilton. And so King stayed when he came back because he'd had a riot. The invaders had come into the demonstration, and they were out there breaking windows and everything, and that turned into a fiasco. King had to come back because nonviolence was on the crucifix, and nonviolence was being challenged here, and King had to come back to show that nonviolence had not run its course, and it was not out of steam, and he could lead a nonviolent movement. So there's no doubt about it, the fact he had to come back. But because he'd been criticized, he stayed at the Lorraine Hotel, which was the black motel, which was over there on the other side of town. And that's where he was, in fact, shot. But the segregation that was, in fact, taking place in terms of the accommodations wasn't mandated by the business people. How could the business people tell the city that we're not going to have any black? How would they do that? That would come down by the fact that the schools were to be segregated, and the accommodation were to be segregated, the buses would be segregated, lunch counters would be segregated. No businessman is doing that. The politicians are doing it. And when the politicians stopped doing it, the people had no problems with it. We'll get back to this Payton thing, but I will make this point, that during the Montgomery bus boycott, when they were walking and boycotting for 381 days, they did that for more than 1 year. And of course, we want to talk about the people were walking to work, and they were in fact being put in they created carpools for a while, or they had taxes. But let's understand another thing that was going on. Those women who had employed their domestics, the ones you saw in that film called The Help, they picked those workers up and put them in their cars and took them to work. Now, this is the heart of Dixie. You've seen the movie called Driving Miss Daisy? Okay, well, Miss Daisy was driving her workers to work. The workers, the power seats in a taxi, the one that's paying, the power seat's in the back. I mean, the guy's up there in the front, he's the chauffeur. And he's taking you where you want to go. Well, in Montgomery, the women went and picked their workers up, and they were in the front seat driving. The taxi service was these women driving their workers to their jobs. They weren't all walking now. So, some of them were being picked up. Now, they're riding in white people's cars. And they're supposed to be so racist, overwhelmed with racism, that they couldn't deal with black folks. And they wanted to sit in the back of the bus. Well, they're sitting in the back of their own cars, they didn't have a problem with it. So what would the bus be a problem with them for? They just wanted to get to work. That's what they were concentrating on. The politicians were concentrating on getting the votes. And what they had done was keep the blacks from voting and then let the whites vote and make them feel like they're being advantaged. So they vote for the politicians that's keeping the blacks out. And that's politicians doing that, and whites are benefiting from it. Nobody's ever going to say, I don't want to benefit. Anybody feel like if you win the lottery and the other guy doesn't win the lottery, do you think you should give the lottery winnings up because the other guy lost? Or you don't mind being advantaged by coming out on top? I don't know of anybody who would. I mean, there are some, but let's face it, that takes virtue, and it takes more virtue than most of us have to say we don't want to be advantaged, that we're willing to have no advantage, and we're satisfied with that. But no, it was not the business persons, and you will not find the business persons doing it. We're going to have to go back and we're going to try to do some of this month to try to bring the civil rights movement into a greater integrated visibility, because a lot of what we're doing right now, even as it relates to the Super Bowl, has to do with not having an understanding of the civil rights movement. And I will tell you the reason why I say that is because there are people, one of my friends telling me this morning, there are people on his post trying to make it into a racial incident that Wilson, the quarterback for Seattle, didn't win the Most Valuable Player award. Now, forget about the fact that the guy that did win, he was black too. But because the black quarterback is playing against Peyton Manning, and they don't want to have Peyton Manning shown up, as if we didn't see Peyton Manning out there being shown up on the football field. I mean, we saw him out there throwing those interceptions. But because they didn't give it to Wilson, then that's because of racism. Now, I'm supposed to forget I watched the game, and that by the time that the first half came to a close, no matter what Wilson was doing, the other team hadn't scored anything. And if you had the defense that had the first points, which was a 2-point conversion when they had the touchback, when they had the safety, they call it safety now, when they had the safety where the ball was covered by the team that was on offense in his own end zone, and that went for 2 points rather than 7 points. The other team had covered 7 points, 6 points, and extra point for extra point for the 7 point. If it had been the other team covering, it would have been a touchdown. But because the offensive team covered it, it was a safety, or we used to call it a touchback. That was 2-0 right there. And since it didn't score in the first half, I'm talking about Denver, then that has nothing to do with Wilson, because the defense didn't let the other team score. You remember when I told you a little earlier that they're out there doing the same work, but they're not getting the same pay? There's a wage gap between the two men. Well, they would have won the game right there if they had scored 7 more points, because the other team only scored 8 points. Now, does that sound like the person on offense should get the award to you? But they turned that into a race situation. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to have these false narratives until we go back and get some of the history straight. And we're preparing some of the discussions here at FlintTalkRadio.com this month, Black History Month, so as to be able to go back into that discussion and do that, because not very many people understand what the Civil Rights Movement was all about from 1950, I'm going to say 1954, because I think that's where the energy of the Civil Rights Movement was actually launched, from the Brown case, on May the 17th, 1954, when the Supreme Court ruled upon the Brown versus Board of Education case in Topeka, Kansas, which was the case at the top of the 5 cases that were actually filed. And it's known as Brown versus Board because the name Brown comes before some of the other names that were filing what was really a class action suit in 5 different places. Kansas just being one of them, but also Delaware and Washington, D.C., Virginia was one, and even South Carolina, Clarendon County, South Carolina, where they had the psychologist Kenneth Clark bringing in the Dahl test and trying to make it appear that because children were going to these schools in the South that were segregated, they had a distorted view of themselves, and they thought only the black dolls were ugly and the white dolls were pretty, and that is due to segregation. I mean, they made this argument, which is ludicrous on the face of it. This is before we had the rapper named Ludacris. He's ludicrous too, but this is ludicrous also. And for them to make that claim, and then and they said because the children got low self-esteem, and maybe that was the case. But the ones that were in the other schools that were not segregated had chose the black dolls as being ugly more often than the ones that were in segregated schools. So segregation couldn't explain that. And so we can get off that horse. But we have to go back into this movement, and we have to go back and try to bring it up to speed so that when we see a game, we can leave it in the area of sports and not bring it into this arena where we have race playing a role in what is a sporting event. I mean, I was listening to ESPN this morning, and I was listening to Richard Sherman. Now, I'm aware of Richard Sherman now, but I didn't know him before he went into that tirade after the game that they had with, I think they played San Francisco, if I'm not mistaken. And I didn't know him from Adam. I had never heard his name. I mean, I don't watch much football until, as I said earlier, until the playoffs, and then I watch the Super Bowl game as long as I can stand it, as long as it's not a blowout. And then after that is over, start showing the cheerleaders. But don't be showing me no team out there that's getting blown out and think I want to watch them out there on offense and they're not scoring any points.
You know, I was 14 years old before I realized Dallas had a football team. I always felt that, dude, they're there for I was just watching for the cheerleaders. It's like, oh, that's what falls. That's what they're there for. Okay, it makes sense now.
Well, you know, when they had that one bad game with Alabama playing, I forget the team they were playing, but the quarterback for Alabama had a very pretty girlfriend that was in the stands. She was going to another school, but they realized that there's no game going out here. Alabama is crucifying these guys, and who wants to watch that? So what they began to do was show this quarterback's girlfriend. Every time he's out there on the field, we knew he was going to score a touchdown, so they started showing his girlfriend because that was boring. They marched down the field, another touchdown, the team is further behind, can't catch up. Who wants to see that? We want to see competitive games. And so they showed the guy's girlfriend, made her a superstar. I don't even think they're together anymore because I think after that was over, the girl got so big in terms of her popularity, and all the guys want to date her now, that she didn't want to date this guy now a nerd because look how popular she is now. But that's what you do. You have to create a diversion. And I was waiting for them to show the cheerleaders on the sideline, the pom-poms, and what kind of dance routes, what kind of dance numbers they're doing, and things like that. And bring Queen Latifah out here and sang "America the Beautiful." She did a good job, and bring something other than the football in the second half because we saw more of the same. Advertisers, I think you ought to ask for some of your money back because we were watching that game after the third quarter. Anybody that was advertising the fourth quarter, get some of your money back because we turned the TV set off. We knew the outcome. You weren't showing us the cheerleaders. And the football game wasn't what's happening, so we just turned it off. And you still pay that $250,000 for, 15 seconds? I don't know what the rate was this time, but I know last year it was like 30 seconds. You paid $500,000 and upwards for a half minute, and that's why they're talking as fast in those commercials as I do when I'm talking here on FlintTalkRadio.com, trying to get all the words in. But no, discrimination doesn't explain why the quarterback didn't get it. What explains it is that whoever was on defense, locking down the team that scored 6,000 points in the season, whoever was on the other side of that ball doing that, somebody got to be standing out that's causing that, because that team was shut completely down. And if they had scored 9 points, they would have won. So the quarterback cannot explain how if you scored 9 points, you win the game, and you can't put that on offense when the other team only scored 8 points. And so I don't think you can say the quarterback. And to turn it into that is just disingenuous. Now let's go back to Richard Sherman. Now he was on. I saw him on ESPN this morning because I want to get some of the commentary, see what people are talking about, see if it matches up with what I think occurred on the football field, and if the commentary matches what I think we ought to be talking about. And I don't think we'll be talking about the fact that Peyton Manning's a nice guy. We all know that. He's no klutz when it comes down to showing class, and that whole family's like that. From what I saw in the interviews yesterday, but they interviewed Richard Sherman, and he was sitting down, had his headphones on around his neck, and very coherent, and made a lot of sense, and showed himself to be quite a remarkable young man. But I didn't know him from Adam, and when I saw him up there in that interview that he did after that playoff game, and he did an outstanding play, I give him credit for that. When I saw him up there after it was over, turning the player that he had defended against, and was in the guy's face and all of that, which showed no class. Anybody, I watch guys try to knock their brains out in boxing. But what I'm always impressed with is when that fight is over, they understand it's a sporting event, and one guy won and one guy lost, and they both competed, and they respect that and respect each other because they understand that if the other guy is not competing, they don't get a paycheck. So the other guy's causing you to get paid. Can we get some respect here? So I love it when they box to the best of their ability. These guys are throwing some blows or knock people's heads off if they're not up there hiding behind their gloves. But when that contest is over, those guys go over there and they hug each other to show that they understand it was a sporting event. And they're not over there talking about, I knock you upside your head and blah. I don't hear it. I hear that before the fight starts. After the fight is over, big respect from both of the winner and the loser. That's tremendous class. Well, I saw Richard Sherman, who I didn't know him from Adam, and he's up there in this guy's, what's his name, Crabtree or something like that was this guy name, and he's in this guy's face and turning the guy, and then when the lady, the interviewer, asked him a very simple question, very low-key, asked him a question, and the guy goes off again and hollering in the microphone and telling everybody else, if you throw in my direction, I'm the best player, the cornerback is in the league. If you throw in my, you will get the same thing. Well, you know what? I immediately thought, hey, this guy didn't have any class. And when some called him a thug, and he then turns that into a racial incident, I didn't want to hear that. Because I don't think that's what that was about. He's going to equate being called, them saying he was acting like a thug with a sly way of them calling him the N-word. And I don't know if this guy has 3.9, so I know that he knows the alphabets. But the N-word, that's in the N section of the dictionary. Can we all agree on that? And the word thug, that's in the T section. Now, I'm also making the point that there are a lot of N-words, so when you start saying the N-word, I'd be honest with you, I know I live here and I'm not living under a rock, but, you know, talk to me, and when you talk to me in language. Don't be talking to me about no letters. And so, I mean, are we adults here or what? But he came across as a thug. Now, I didn't know him from Adam. And when I got more information, you know, like this interview that I saw this morning. When I got more information, I changed my mind. Now, if racism was the explanation, you know, for the characterization of Richard Sherman, and there was no other variable involved in it, like he was not out there acting like a thug, then you know what would happen? He could have had that interview on ESPN where he was making a lot of sense, very articulate, and no one would have changed their mind. if racism was driving it. But you thinking about it, going to see that? You know, my friend told me this morning, because I didn't even know they were talking about race this morning about the game. But a friend of mine called me this morning. And he said, George, you won't believe that they're trying to turn this into a racial incident. He said, I'm writing on my wall that, look, we don't need to turn this into a march on Washington or turn this into Selma. I said, what do you mean? He said, George, you won't believe that on one of the chats I'm in, because I joined some of the sports chats. I'm not into those. That's why I was missing this conversation. But he said, you won't believe that on the wall that they are in here talking about there was discrimination, that the quarterback did not get the most valuable player award. Now, the guy that had 10 sacks, I mean, the other team didn't score for the whole half. These guys scored 6,000. Let me repeat this. They scored 6,000 yards during the season. Peyton Manning had 55 touchdown passes. Can we get to this? And the guy didn't score in the first half. The team was totally dominated, 3 and out. And that was just repetitive all during the first half. The guy was coming on. When he scored, when he finally made the first down, I thought we should count that as a touchdown. That's how few yards they had. I said, give them a touchdown. If they on one drive, if they have 2 first downs, count that as a touchdown to get this game close. And the advertisers won't lose their money. But no, that would be too much like evening stuff up. I'm sure Barack Obama would have liked it, because that would be redistributing the points. But we're not going to have that anytime soon. Not in terms of where you can compete, because your competition decides what your income is going to be, and that's competition. The president doesn't understand, by the way, in the marketplace. And you compete for the jobs, you compete for the income and your skill level and your preparation. That's determinant. That's the determinant of your income. Not this idea that we're going to take this and give it over here to this guy, or let's just apply the standard over there in the football game. We're going to take the salary of the ones that won it and say, look, we got to go back and put that $92,000 in with that $46,000 and divide this stuff by 2 and just cut it down the middle and give each one of y'all half. We can't be having this differential in place. Nobody thought about doing that, because that would be fundamentally unfair, because both teams had a chance to get the pie, and only one team actually walked away with it. We got to give the other team something for their superior performance, and that's what they did in terms of the winning check was cut at a higher rate than the losing check. And that's the way it should be, because you are rewarded based upon merit, or should be. And any system that does not operate upon that is the immoral system. And that's what we call it for the United States. By the way, and it's a side point, did anybody see the debate at Dartmouth College between, and I think this was carried very well by this man, Dinesh D'Souza. I don't know anybody else. I know some smart people on the right. I don't know anyone that could have carried this banner any better than Dinesh D'Souza did from the right, that was arguing, was debating with the Pentagon bomber, Bill Ayers. And that debate, I think that really that debate should be must viewing, and by those who are serious, trying to find out what are the two sides hollering about from their different perches. What is the right hollering about and talking about, and what is the left hollering about and talking about? And in that discussion, I think you can quantify the discussion right around that debate, because that was you have to be there for a while. I think that debate lasted, let's see, what was it, an hour and 12 minutes or so? You're going to be there for a while, but I'll tell you, that debate was really something to look at what the left is saying. And really, to be honest with you, they don't have too many debates anymore, because the left does not really want to have what they're saying as analogous to what the other side is saying, because then you see how extreme these things are. I mean, they had the topic was on what's great about America. Bill Ayers said he's going to put a list down when he was given the topic and preparing for the debate. He put a list down, and guess what the list started to stop? Chicago. It didn't include Indiana. I mean, he couldn't think of nothing great in the country at large. It's just Chicago. I live there. I know it better. He said best. He said, and that's what I focus on. And then when he listed that in Chicago, that was great. It was everybody and their grandfather and grandmother as well. Don't be sexist here. Don't want you to tell it saying we're calling for women to get less money. So he was actually talking about the ones inside Chicago that were great. Bigger Thomas, which was Richard Wright's creation. There was Annie, the novel, the book of novels put out by Gwendolyn Brooks. Turgill, what's his name? The writer that put Slaughterhouse 5. What's his name, John?
Slaughterhouse Horace Vonnegut.
Yeah, that's right.
Kurt Vonnegut.
All these he was talking about all the ones. There's another one then that it wasn't. That's right. Kurt Vonnegut was the one that wrote the Slaughterhouse 5. It's another writer then. Stirs somebody.
Studs Terkel?
That's him.
Yeah, Studs Terkel.
Yeah, that's him. And all the ones that have made these attacks upon the country at some point in time, those were the great ones. And he couldn't see anything great in terms of documents and things like that. And when he brought it up, such as, for example, he asked the audience, this is Bill Ayers, asked the audience, we got to find something wrong with the country. And he asked the audience, how many of you are against slavery? Well, people thought this was a rhetorical question. You know why? Because who is for slavery today? This is 100 and some years after the 13th Amendment was passed. How many persons want slavery today in the United States? So they didn't answer. They thought it was a rhetorical question. Well, he said, this is Dartmouth. I know it's Dartmouth, but I'm going to ask this question again. How many of you are against slavery? Well, everybody in the audience was against slavery. So whoopee-doo, and I'm so surprised. Well, he wanted to know, well, your being against slavery would put you on the other side of the framers. He wanted to let you know that they were, in fact, slave owners, some of them, and so on and so forth. Well, you think that was a point made, but I'll tell you, when Dinesh D'Souza came up, he said that the framers put into place the idea of all men are created equal, and did not do it in terms of saying that was true in the United States, but set a paradigm for the entire world. In other words, the idea was there so that when the time would allow the idea to be acted upon, then they could act upon the ideal of the nation. I mean, that's what happened.
It's like, I don't know if you knew this, but the Stoic philosophers, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, both, one was a slave, Epictetus, the other one was Marcus Aurelius was an emperor of the Roman Empire. Both of them were considered Stoic philosophers. Both of them, one of the central points of Stoicism is that all men are created equal. But I just outlined one of them was a slave, and one of them was an emperor. So even in a society or within a group that had that mindset, they had that, there's a central focus of the thrust of their philosophy. There was this kind of dichotomy about what they advocated and what they actually was the reality of the society at that time for them. So it's like, yeah, they advocated, it's a problematic issue for us to have to do a handle. But inconsistencies, Bill Ayers would have to, I would turn that on him and say, you advocate for socialism, yet you talk about having two houses. One time during an interview on CNN, you have a house in suburban Chicago, and you also have a house someplace in California. Mm-hmm. How can you reconcile that with your advocacy of all equality? How many people who own two homes, especially in two very viable real estate markets such as the Chicago area and someplace in California? How do you reconcile that with your socialistic applications?
Mm-hmm. And I see those kinds of contradictions everywhere the socialists go. The liberals are some of the biggest hypocrites in the country and on the planet. You see that in terms of the other thing that Bill Ayers was pushing. When he raised the question of the contradictions in America, Dinesh D'Souza said that when you compare a country, you have to have some other country to compare it with. And when you look at America and look at other countries, then you see that this country has set the standard for the rest of the world. Well, Bill Ayers couldn't let that stand, so his argument was then that what I'm talking about is judge America not by looking elsewhere, but by America looking at itself. Which I say, okay, fine, then let's take that standard that Bill Ayers puts out. But here's the hypocrisy of it. He doesn't apply that standard anywhere else, which is what Dinesh D'Souza was trying to do. Let's apply the standard. That's what he's really saying. Let's apply the standard, and then let's apply the standard throughout the world, not just simply having America look at itself, but having America look at the rest of the world also in comparison to itself.
You know, every time a liberal opens their mouth about that kind of stuff, like a progressive, socialist, like Ayers, I like to point out the thing that they always have these ought to, could, and we should things. This kind of this value table of values that they act that existed some other culture. When the fact is, the abuses they're trying to say that we have to examine and and feel chagrined about and feel saddened by and guilty of, were not just something common. They were prevalent throughout societies all over the globe. They were like injustices permeated against everybody, against everyone at different points of the scale of history. So, I mean, for them to have this avocation of a home Oswald standard that was never ever attainable in human society ever.
Yeah, not ever.
And it's ridiculous. America was the only country that was started out with an idea of what we wanted to be.
And what the world could be. Set another paradigm of what the world could actually be like. And the question that was raised is, what would the world look like if America was not here? And I like this point that was made when it said that rather than looking at self-interest as being selfish, he said, we didn't get in World War II until Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. We were acting out of self-interest, but did the rest of the world benefit that we stood Tojo down and we also stood down Adolf Hitler? Did the world benefit from that?
Actually, that's ridiculously too. If you're supposed to be a history law student, him saying that we didn't get involved in during the war, up to that point is ridiculous. We were helping England already.
Yeah.
We were also helping China fight against the Japanese. Right. So I mean, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about if he makes that assertion.
The Lend-Lease. We were definitely, and we were actually provoking out there in the South Pacific. If you read John Toland's book, so in
many ways we did. FDR's policies set the course for Japan to have nothing but to react this way but trying to seize property and land. That's what the prohibitionistic attitude about trade with Japan at that point basically just kept on poking at Japan to get them to react.
Yeah,
that's what they did.
That's what they did, and history is very clear about that, although not widely known. One other point that I want to make here before we get off the air, and I want to bring it back to our subject about the football game and that as well, is the point that was made about the fact that our policies are based upon imperialism. Dinesh D'Souza said that America's foreign policy is really twofold. John, he said the foreign policy of the country is twofold. America's foreign policy is trade with us, don't attack us. And he said that's pretty much our foreign policy. Don't attack us and trade with us. And he said that if, in fact, it is about imperialism and controlling the oil, then why don't we own it?
But here's another point, too. Progressives that are such like that, they are more like Wilsonians and Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson want to export democracies all over the world. That means heavy government intervention and us trying to make little countries just like crank them out on an assembly line when cultures weren't even prepared for that or didn't yearn for that.
Yeah.
So basically it was the progressive meaning always changing stuff. Well, that's what Woodrow Wilson advocated. That's what caused a reaction to our presence in the world. We kept on trying to make everybody else like us, and that's due to the progressive mentality.
It certainly is. The Democrats got us involved in wars, and Republicans, conservatives have gotten us out of it. Well, I think we have to stop making things up out of whole cloth. Certainly the racial narrative in terms of the Super Bowl cannot be sustained. A black person got it, and the quarterback who was black, he did not get it, but it was not like there was race involved in it. You can't claim race when race is the same person, the same race, got the award. So I don't know how you make that claim and have any kind of integrity. Sherman, you're not a thug, and if you're not a thug, don't act like it. People won't have to conclude that you're a thug. Carry yourself like you did in that interview that you did yesterday after the Super Bowl game was over, and they'll look at you and see you through that lens. Okay, we got to get out of here, John. I know we are running out of time. Thank you for staying tuned, everybody out there in the listenership. Stay tuned to all the programs here at flinttalkradio.com. Until next time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.